In this video, we're going to go over some tips and tricks on how to prepare for the recording studio as a drummer. Whether it's your first time preparing for a studio session or if you've done countless amounts of sessions before, there's a few fundamental things we need to know and understand before we spend hundreds of dollars on recording time. On this channel, I produce drum lessons, drum covers, and drum vlogs. If you're new to this channel, please consider subscribing and don't forget to hit that notification bell so you don't miss a thing. The first and yet most important thing we need to know before we go into the studio as a drummer is how to play to a metronome or a click track. Now, if you don't know what this word means, then you're definitely not ready to go into the studio and spend your hard-earned money on some recording time. A metronome is a device that produces a click or another sound at a regular interval that can be set by the drummer or the user, which is usually depicted by BPM or beats per minute. Learn to practice with the metronome, learn to master it, and you'll be slaying any drum session that's thrown your way, believe it or not. If you feel that a metronome is too robotic or it kind of ruins the feel of your playing, then you still need to practice with it more. Because once you're able to maneuver around the pulse that's created by this device, then you'll learn to understand when you're playing on the beat, before the beat, or after the beat. Am I rushing or am I dragging? Number two, also very important, learn your parts. There's nothing worse than going into a studio when the engineer has spent countless amount of time setting up the mics and getting sounds, and then you go to sit down at the drum set to cut your drum tracks and you just completely fail. How embarrassing. Like, man, what was that bridge going into the first chorus? Yeah, that's not gonna fly in a studio, especially when you're spending money and other people's time is at your disposal. You really need to have it together, man. Now, you need to know your parts in and out, and yes, that includes without other musicians, like your guitar player, your bass player, whatever. So you wanna practice the tracks to the first thing we talked about, a metronome, and get your parts down super tight without other musicians so that you know your parts really well before you actually go in to lay down your tracks. If you can't play it on your own, you're definitely not ready for a studio session. Now, what I would suggest you do is you get your guitar player or bass player or whoever you follow to when you guys practice, get them to record themselves on their phone or whatever device is at their disposal, something that you can practice along to without them actually having to be there. So you can just practice along to their tracks with a metronome and get it all to lock in before you go into the studio. Believe me, you'll walk into the studio and you're gonna impress everybody because you're able to cut your tracks in record time without the slop and all that other crap with it. Number three is gear. You don't need the best gear in the world or the most expensive gear in the world to do the job. But what you do need is a set that'll actually sound good and is tuned properly and is skinned properly, and you don't have crappy old cymbals with cracks and holes in it for your session. Now, it's obvious that not everybody can afford top of the line gear. However, it is important that when you're going into the studio that your drums be tuned up properly and your skins don't look like the surface of the moon. If you still have the same drum skins on the kit that you bought 5 years ago, then I think it's time to change your skins, man. Another little tip that I can advise you about is to not skin your drums the night before your session. Now, the issue with that is it doesn't give your drum set and your skin enough time to actually seat itself around the bearing edge of the drum. So you want to give it a few days and let that skin naturally set on the shell of the drum. Since we're on the topic of gear, I want to talk to you about cymbals. They should be in good condition too. They don't need to be top of the line custom cymbals, but don't bring a cymbal with a nasty crack in it because it's going to sizzle and you're going to definitely hear it on the recording. There's not much you can do other than sound replace it, and who wants to do that? What's the point of being there in the first place, right? Bring good cymbals. Even if you have to go to a local music store and rent some for the session, then that's a great option too, but just don't bring crappy old cymbals because you're going to sound like crap. It's simply that. Now, let's say you have good toms, good skins, and good cymbals. You need some good stands that'll hold it up. You don't want to be halfway through your take and then your cymbal stand just starts falling over and you've just ruined a completely good take. Bring really reliable hardware and stands too so that they don't fall over everywhere and potentially ruin the engineer's great drum mic collection. Tip number 4, drum tuning. This is very important in regards to drum recording. And if you haven't seen my tom tuning video yet, I'll link that down in the description below and you can go check it out right after this one. Now remember, if you're moving your drums from a warm room into a cold car back into a warm studio, you're going to have some discrepancies in tuning range, because what has happened is that the shell and the skin itself has gotten cold and warm, so it's expanded and contracted. So you want to have your drum key with you, the elusive drum key you never are able to find, and just give it a fine tune before you start to cut some drum tracks, because they're more than likely out of tune. So remember, these 4 pieces of advice, you'll be slaying sessions in no time. Thanks again for watching. I'm Cameron, and I'll see you on the next one.